Hi, everyone. Apologies for this short delay. I'm watching our participants list go up and up. But in the meantime, I just want to welcome everyone and introduce myself. My name's Mary-Kay Lombino. I'm one of the curators and the deputy director at the Francis Lehman Loeb Art Center at Vassar. And I'm so pleased to see so many people attending this webinar. And I also have some of our speakers that are here who will be introduced in just a moment. First, I just want to mention a few of our tips for using this webinar. This evening, we're not going to be using the raise hand or the chat feature due to the number of attendees. Instead, the participants who are actually on mute will have an opportunity to ask questions through the Q&A box. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon on the toolbar, and you can type your questions there. And if you'd like to be identified, you can begin your question with your name, but anonymous questions are perfectly fine as well. And we'll do our best to answer those questions after the presentations. And sometimes if there are overlapping themes, we might consolidate those for efficiency's sake, but please feel free to ask questions. We're looking forward to hearing from you. So I'm going to actually start by just introducing a little bit about why we put together this panel. And some of that has to do with an exhibition that we have on view now at the Loeb. And I'm going to start sharing my screen again. And just advance to the next slide. So what you're seeing here are two works by Kara Walker. And Kara Walker is an artist who many of you have heard of. She's a multimedia artist who investigates the ways in which history shapes our identity. And in particular, she probes the construction of Black identities in the wake of slavery and imperialism. And last year, she was commissioned to create Fons Americanus at the Tate Modern, which is what you're seeing on the left-hand side. And this is a monumental fountain that weaves together histories of the slave trade in Africa, Europe, and America. Apologies for my dog barking in the background. And she connects those narratives to the present. And she created this large installation for the Tate. And then she also created this smaller version of the sculpture, also called Fons Americanus. And she created an edition of 30. And the Loeb was lucky enough to be able to acquire this piece. And so I've been thinking a lot about monuments ever since we acquired this piece. As you can imagine, I was already thinking about them when this summer monuments began to make the news again as a result of Black Lives Matter protests against police violence. And they were staged all over the country, often at the site of public monuments. So I thought this would be a perfect time to showcase and sort of unveil this new acquisition and make it a focal point for an exhibition in the Focus Gallery called Monumental Misrememberings, Photographs and Statues of Contested Histories. So this is an installation view of a very small exhibition. It's really just features these two sculptures, the Kara Walker Fons Americanus that we just purchased, and another piece, which is a 19th century work by Hammett Billings that memorializes pilgrims from Europe arriving on the shores of Massachusetts, and to put these two alongside one another. And while both statues draw these visual conventions and motifs from Western European art, and they feature figures that symbolize various things, they have a particular view of history. While Billings celebrates a dominant history, Walker's work really imagines a monument that commemorates untold, hidden, and forgotten histories. So also on view is a slide presentation that you see in the background here, and that shows photographs, very recent photographs from this summer that document citizens in various cities across America, but also in the UK, where people were having protests and defacing and destroying monuments that are seen as symbols of historical oppression. And so we put the two statuettes here, and we featured these photographs. and sort of brought these earlier monuments into the present. And what we'll be doing this evening with our panel is to really look at this topic of monuments and public art in the context of a more local movement that's happening right here in Poughkeepsie. And that brings us to an introduction that I'd like to make now of a professor here at Vassar named Katherine Hite, who's a professor of political science and is the Frederick Ferris Thompson Chair and Director of Faculty Research at Vassar. She's the author of several books, including Politics of the Art of Communication, Memorials to Struggle in Latin America and Spain, and Sustaining Human Rights in the 21st Century, Strategies from Latin America, as well as many articles on history and memory, memorials, and memorial museums. Her research has been supported by the Fulbright Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Social Science Research Council. Katie teaches classes on social movements, Latin American politics, and the politics of memory. She lives in the city of Poughkeepsie and is one of the co-founders of Celebrating the African Spirit, which we're going to hear a little bit more about. So welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Mary-Kay. And thank you to the Loeb, to Mary-Kay and Bart and Elizabeth and Margaret and Francine, and to Vassar Media Resources, Tom Sinistor tonight, who's pulling off this whole Zoom webinar. And to Zoe, our great intern for Celebrating the African Spirit, and to Vassar students and recent grads, Lily, Ezra, Zara, and to Sarah Evans from the class of 2018, who I think may be joining us on this Zoom webinar. I'm so honored to be on this panel with such powerful women. And hello to all our cast members and to everyone. So 2020, what a year. We're in a moment that demands a deep reckoning, a truth-telling, and none too soon. Our national elections fully exposed to ourselves and to the world what very deep trouble our country's in, and I feel shame, less surprise than I once might have felt, but real shame. As a white person, I always took for granted how overwhelmingly represented I am by the major symbols and stories of the country, the monuments and memorials, the markers, the school textbooks. Over the past several years, and as Mary-Kay said, and in this year with the murder of George Floyd, the movement for Black lives has powerfully connected these dominant symbols of the past with the present. And activists all over the country are insisting that racist monuments come down and that artists like Carol Walker and like Vinnie Bagwell help facilitate a more truthful story of America. Memorials and monuments, the wording on historical markers are opening up important conversations about who we are, what US history looks like, what stories need to be told and reckoned with toward what I hope is a better future. And this is painful all around, and clearly it's also threatening to a significant number. I do find it helpful for us to distinguish between a memorial and a monument, even if they're often used interchangeably as terms. Monuments are traditionally celebrations of great achievements, and in this country, monuments are also overwhelmingly to white men, often men on horseback. They're often phallic, like the Washington Monument. It's telling that while the Confederates lost the US Civil War, their statues are largely monuments, not memorials, and that should tell us something about their purpose, their message, which is to celebrate a great person or cause, even if the Confederates didn't achieve a military victory. On the other hand, I'd also argue, and as Mary-Kay said, and that many of Vinnie Bagwell's public artworks are monuments celebrating African-American heroes and moments and victories. Memorials, on the other hand, mourn and remember loved ones. Memorials can also be about conveying a broader message to the public. Memorials are about somber recognition of loss and sacrifice. Monuments and memorials and markers are not just about history. They're punctuations of particular histories. They signal that a moment or a person should be recognized, should be mourned or celebrated. The fact that the vast majority of monuments in the United States, again, are to white men should already signal something to us about power. So when we look at a monument or memorial or marker, it's always worth thinking about how it came to be there, as well as what it means and for whom it was established. Who got to decide that it be placed on the public square? Who got the vote on what it should look like or what phrasing should be engraved? In other words, what were the power dynamics behind establishing the monument or memorial? And what might the memorial be asking of us? What memorial or monument might we like to see walking to school or home or to work? So I'm now going to turn to two of C.A.S's co-founders, Carmen McGill and Kalimah Karim. Kalimah Karim is a community health nurse. The majority of her nursing career has been dedicated to improving health outcomes for people of color, both adults and children. She's a Lamaze certified childbirth educator. A lifelong New Yorker, Kalimah has been a Poughkeepsie resident for the past 8 years. A mom and grandmother, Kalimah started OurStoryCollectibles.com, offering Afrocentric, Western, and Asian art and decor because, quote, it's vital that everyone can feel their surroundings reflect their story. She's now the treasurer of C.A.S. Carmen Marceline McGill is a retired admissions counselor and personnel administrator. She's an advocate for the rights and justice of all people, particularly sensitive to the needs of people of color. During her 45 years in Poughkeepsie, Carmen has been active in the Kwanzaa Committee, the Poughkeepsie City Schools PTA, Board of Education Committees, the Black History Project Committee, the Dutchess County Historical Society Board, the NAACP, the AAUW, and others. And she's a mentor and an elder to many, many people. And she's the co-chair of C.A.S.
All right, they just give me 1 second, folks, so I can get this full screen and we can see it larger. Okay, sorry about that delay. Okay, I'm Kalimah Karim, and thank you, Katie, for that beautiful introduction. We're here tonight to talk about the importance of monuments, memorials, and markers, and to talk about how commemorating our past can help shape a better future here in Poughkeepsie. And of course, this evening is co-sponsored by the Francis Lehman Loeb Art Center, Vassar College, and Celebrating the African Spirit, Inc. And we're so honored to have as our special guest, the sculptor Vinnie Bagwell. To talk about where we are today, we have to go back in the past. In this case, about 150 years or so back, and to find out what caused the situation that we're in today. Starting with Huckleberry Finn, we blowed out a cylinder head. Good gracious, anybody hurt? No, ma'am, killed a nigger. Well, it's lucky because sometimes people do get hurt. When you're not considered a human being, this enables people to justify the denial of your basic humanity and their enslavement of you, rape and other violence, land theft, imprisonment, genocide. People who've been subject to this treatment include the Japanese people Japanese Americans who were interred here in this country during World War II and had their land and property taken away from them. Holocaust survivors from the same era who endured unspeakable hardships, tragedies, and atrocities. Chinese people who came to the United States to help build the railroads, the Transcontinental Railroad, and to labor in the gold mines, and who were treated like animals in this country. And the Native American people of the North American continent who have been brutalized, had genocide committed against them. The United States Army made war against them. Their lands were taken away. Their children were forced into boarding schools to steal their culture. And the Native American peoples of this continent have often been forced to live on barren reservations in great hardship. Other indigenous peoples who have suffered similar fates include the Maori people of New Zealand, the Aboriginal people in Australia, and then, of course, the African people, many of whom endured being stolen away from our homeland and transported across the Middle Passage in chains into years and centuries of slavery. Clinicians recognize that being subjected to or witnessing, not even being subjected to, just witnessing, even one horrific act can trigger PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. And we've known for a while that this can cause many behavioral and mental conditions, but now the experts are also saying that post-traumatic stress disorder is related to many physical health problems. And this is according to the United States Veterans Administration and the National Center for PTSD. Now, as a nurse, I could spend this entire evening and probably a couple of more evenings talking about the many ways that myriad health conditions disproportionately affect African American people. But in the interest of brevity, I'm just going to mention a few key ones. How about the fact that deaths from cardiac disease, which includes hypertension or high blood pressure, are twice as likely, or more than twice as likely, really, to occur to African Americans than to Caucasians in this country? How about the fact that African American maternal morbidity, i.e. pregnancy-related deaths, are 2 to 3 times higher than among Caucasian women? And the interesting thing that a recent study showed is that education is not a factor, income is not a factor. When somebody as rich and famous as Serena Williams still has to fight for her life in childbirth, then that shows that perhaps there's something else going on. And breast cancer deaths are actually 40% higher for Black women than for Caucasian women, even though the incidence of contracting the disease is essentially the same. But Black women die at a 40% higher rate than white women from breast cancer. And this information is per the CDC and the American Cancer Society. Now, if the impact from just one horrific experience can trigger PTSD and a plethora of mental and physical and behavioral symptoms, what would happen if he experienced over 400 years of this? Well, according to social scientist Dr. Joy DeGruy, the result is something called post-traumatic slave syndrome. Post-traumatic slave syndrome is a condition that exists as a consequence of multi-generational oppression of Africans and their descendants, resulting in centuries of chattel slavery. This behavior was predicated by the belief that African Americans were not as good inherently. They're genetically inferior to whites. And the slavery was followed by institutional racism, which continues to perpetuate injury, according to Dr. DeGroot. Well, you might say, well, yes, that's terrible, but I didn't enslave anybody. I'm not a slaveholder. Some of my best friends are Black people, or my boss, or my neighbor, or let me just stop you right there. Because the platitudes don't help when we recognize another fundamental thing that Dr. DeGroot said. One of the key identifying factors of post-traumatic slave syndrome is the absence of the opportunity to heal or to access the benefits available in society. So let's focus on this statement and keep this in the forefront of our minds. The absence of the opportunity to heal or to access benefits that are available to others in society. All right, and let's think about this as we talk about what's happened in Poughkeepsie to bring about the birth of celebrating the African spirit. And for this part of the talk, we're going to hear from our beloved Carmen McGill, who is the spirit behind celebrating the African spirit and of many good works for many years here in Poughkeepsie. Carmen.
Carmen, you're muted.
Oh, I'm so sorry. But thank you very much, Kalimah. I appreciate you have set the foundation for the introduction of celebrating the African spirit and the reason that all of us have this passion for this particular project. It is a child of a second generation of 33-year-old civic organization known in recent years as the Black History Project Committee. It started as the Black History Committee of the Dutchess County Historical Society. We have been doing works for a very long time. We separated from the Dutchess County Historical Society over an issue of the veracity of collection from the Guinea site. The diverse ad hoc group was best known for sponsoring free lectures, bus trips to Black cultural events, and the exploration of the Guinea site in Hyde Park, which was an African community, people who worked on the fall kill up there. And it was a very rich excavation. It remains there now as a historic site. The Black History Project Committee also held regular meetings where relevant topics were presented. Lorraine Roberts was the founder of our group, and she was the spirit behind it. She was passionate. She was absolutely a fantastic leader for us, and unfortunately, she left us about 4 years ago. At one of our meetings in 2018, Professor Hite presented a paper by Vassar student, Sarah Evans. Sarah, if you're out there, hi. And on the hidden history of slavery throughout New York State, and specifically in what is now Poughkeepsie. Entitled, her paper was entitled, Recovering the Histories of Human Enslavement, the Muting of Beneficiary Status in Poughkeepsie. It portrays the largely unknown role of the extensive slave trade in New York State in general and in the building of this city and town. No, slavery did not exist did not exist in the South, didn't only exist in the South. Ms. Evans wanted to make people aware of the fact that at one point, 60% of all of the slaves in New York State were located right here in the Hudson Valley. This is Sarah's statistic. If you look at this chart from Bill Jeffway, who is now the president of the Dutchess County, the executive director, excuse me, of the Dutchess County Historical Society. And you can see in 1790, there were almost 1,800 enslaved persons here in Dutchess County. And that is that information is courtesy of Bill. Sarah's paper focused on a historically prominent family, the Livingstons, to show how construction of Poughkeepsie and Hudson Valley has been made possible through human enslavement. There is heavy evidence of many slave owners in the Dutchess County area. There is no evidence at all of the fact that slaves built this area and are the backbone of the economy of Poughkeepsie and Dutchess County. And in Sarah's presentation of this insightful paper, this marked a turning point in the Black History Project Committee and began a shift towards a goal to educate people, both Black and white, to the fact that Poughkeepsie was largely built by enslaved persons and their descendants, and to honor these people both as a group and individually. Subcommittees were formed to discuss possible historic markers, memorials, and ancestral gardens. And by early 2020, the Black History Project Committee voted to become part of the new organization of celebrating the African spirit. And this was a recommendation that Sarah made in her paper that there should be some project to be able to celebrate those enslaved people in this area. And those of us on the Black History Project Committee said, well, yeah, I mean, that is just like, it's so obvious. And all of us missed it until Sarah presented this to us. Most people today don't realize the role that slavery played in the Hudson Valley, as evidenced by recent controversies about depictions in public spaces and government buildings. And some of those examples are the murals in the Rhinebeck and Hyde Park post offices. C.A.S, as celebrating the African spirit is known, C.A.S's goal isn't to simply educate local community about the fact that the horrors of slavery existed here, but to create some of the opportunities to heal and to access the benefits of society, as stated by Dr. DeGruy. Our vision statement, I hope that you're able to see it, to read it yourself, but our purpose is to bring forth these contributions from the enslaved Africans and their descendants in building and growing all of the positive aspects of Poughkeepsie and the Dutchess County area. From the work of the earliest enslaved persons through today, we will collaborate with other organizations and entities to provide opportunities for education and exploration so that the entire community can learn more about its purposefully neglected and ignored aspects of American history. it's by design that we have been left out and totally ignored in the society of today. C.A.S. strongly believes that freedom lives at the intersection of art and activism, which is one of the reasons that we are honored to be a part of this conversation with all of you and with our special guest, the iconic sculptor, Vinnie Bagwell, tonight. We are also honored to be able to share our logo that you see on the left. We're anxious to share that with you. This logo was designed by a local African-American high school senior, Anya West, under the guidance of David Wong of the Artifact Teen Art Program. And it was absolutely wonderful working with Anya and David. As we tried to depict the process on the right that Anya went through when exploring different avenues to find out what would be good, how would it work, why she thought that it would be effective logo. And on the left, she portrayed the yellow as the fight for freedom, the black about the slave trade, and the orange is representing the movement toward change. So, and you can see that she has that depicted in the lower left-hand corner of her paper. And the reasons why we use these colors: orange represents the African flag color for enthusiasm, a mixture of the energetic red and the bright happy yellow. So that's the reason why we used orange. Different variations of skin color in Africa as well as different regions, religions, and cultures are also the reasons for these colors. Anya is a senior at Poughkeepsie High School, and she plans going to college and majoring in art. And we really want to thank her so much for the beautiful job that she did. This process was shepherded by one of the many artists in C.A.S, Ingrid Thompson, who was responsible for the circular placement of the logotype. And Ingrid worked very hard on making sure that we had this beautiful logo. And I'm just so excited about it very much so. Art is an integral part of our history and culture that we plan to use to bring our proposed commemorative projects to life here in Poughkeepsie, such as markers planned for several sites, including the former slave market, the courthouse built by enslaved persons, Upper Landing. Upper Landing is a spot on the Hudson River where enslaved persons arrived in Poughkeepsie and were later labored on the docks and were sold to other slaveholders in the area. One of the markers we ultimately hope to place is at College Hill Park, the site of Frederick Douglass, his historic speech in 1858. What? I mean, you didn't know that Frederick Douglass spoke in Poughkeepsie? That fact is just one of many unearthed by C.A.S outstanding research team, which includes Bill Jeffway, Peter Bunton, and Susan McIntosh. Poughkeepsie was the second capital of the state of New York. And so many noted people came through here, and our location on the Hudson River made it very convenient for people to come here. And this was after the Revolutionary War that it was the second capital. We ultimately hope to have a large presence at College Hill Park, such as ancestral gardens or memorials, and are actively collaborating with or propose to work with other community organizations, design firms, City of Poughkeepsie agencies, and others. This is an aerial view of College Hill, and the area that you see at the top that's encircled in red is where we hope that we will be able to have a presence. There's a proposed rail trail, and hopefully we can find some place here for one or more of our displays. Those College Hill renderings were courtesy of VRINDA SHARMA, who together with Jackie Harper and others are a crucial part of C.A.S's design team. Many, many folks have and continue to work with C.A.S and on our behalf. A few members that we can't fail to give a nod to are Nancy Foster, Muriel Horowitz, and Lydia Hatfield. Open to everyone who's willing to work for our goals, we are incorporated in New York State and have applied for our 501c3 status, which we are expecting back anytime now. And this is a membership plug, folks. For more information about C.A.S, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or email us at celebratingtheafricanspiritny@gmail.com. We hope to see you at the intersection of art and activism as we work together in the community on critical issues such as police reform, hunger, health disparities, housing and related discriminatory practices, and education. And we thank you very much for your attention, and we hope that you will find this project as exciting as we do.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Carmen and Kalimah.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm fascinated by celebrating African spirit. I love getting the walkthrough of your logo. And I love the concept of the intersection of activism and art, as well as so many young people that have been highlighted this evening, from Sarah Evans's paper to Anya's design work to Katie's interns. And there are a lot of young people working at the Loeb. And I just love that we're working with the youth on these important issues. So I am now going to introduce our special guest, Vinnie Bagwell, and she'll give us a talk, and then we can open everything up to questions, and she'll tell us about her work. Vinnie Bagwell is a cultural pioneer and has always been an agent for social, educational, and economic growth through the arts in her community. Vinnie began sculpting in 1993, and her first public artwork was The First Lady of Jazz, Ella Fitzgerald, at the Yonkers Metro North Amtrak train station, which was commissioned by the city of Yonkers in 1996. That work, life-size bronze statue, is the first sculpture of a contemporary African-American woman to be commissioned by a municipality in the United States. Last year, Walter Doc Hurley, a 7-foot bronze statue of a Hartford educator, was commissioned by the state of Connecticut and became the first public artwork of a contemporary African-American in the state of Connecticut. In 2012, Vinnie created a 24-inch bronze work, Liberté, for the inaugural exhibition of the Freedom Rides Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. And in 2018, the DC Department of General Services commissioned a life-size sculpture of music icon Marvin Gaye for a new recreation center in DC. And recently, she completed a 7-foot bronze statue of Sojourner Truth for the walkway over the Hudson that connects Poughkeepsie to Highland, New York. It's the first of several public artworks to celebrate diversity in New York State parks. And Bagwell recently won a $1 million commission for Victory to replace the J. Marion Sims statue on Fifth Avenue in New York City. She has received numerous awards over the years, including most recently, Americans for the Arts inaugural Jorge and Darlene Perez Prize for Civic Engagement. The creative genius of Vinnie's work is to give voice to the stories of marginalized people and meaning to their legacies. So Vinnie, I will welcome you to go ahead and share your screen and tell us a little bit more about your work.
I don't see the little notice that says share the screen at the top. Oh, wait, I see it. Here we go. Hi, I think we're gonna do it. Share. Let's see if I can open this up. All right, so making history. I think what drives me most is that I'm a storyteller. As an artist, I have the luxury of a lot of mediums. I can draw, I can paint, I can sculpt, I can write. But sculpting is the thing that I love the most. And so when I first discovered that I could sculpt, it occurred to me that maybe God wanted me to do something different with my gifts. And so I became, quote unquote, a creative steward of our nation's memory. This is the piano that I made for August Wilson's play, The Piano Lesson. And so the idea is to create public art that conveys unvarnished truth, because when I first started sculpting 25 years ago now, one of the first things that I realized is that there's very little public art that represents people of color. If it's not in the name of diversity, like the Vietnam War Memorial, or something like that, it's just, you just don't see Black people being depicted as people. Usually when you see them, they're, for instance, icons like Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, but what about the rest of the people? And so I decided that it was really important to elevate the culture of marginalized people. This is legacies at Chickasaw Heritage Park in Memphis. And so it's ironic that my first public artwork also is the first public artwork of a contemporary African-American woman to be commissioned by a municipality in the United States. I didn't know that when I first began. I just wanted to make a sculpture that represented my community. I live in Yonkers. Yonkers has quite a bit to kind of blow their horn about, but Ella Fitzgerald was an international music icon. Everybody loved her. And I said to the city, we should celebrate her. We should celebrate her first. She grew up here. And so luckily the city of Yonkers agreed. And so amazingly, the first sculpture of a contemporary African-American woman went into the ground only 24 years ago. So my style, of course, is defined by candid portraiture. This is Temba the Boatman for the Enslaved Africans Rain Garden, which is an urban heritage sculpture garden that I'm developing for Yonkers. It'll be constructed in the spring. I use bas-relief techniques. And again, the idea is to help drive a story. This is the side of the piano. It just gives me a little bit more room to say more about whatever story that I'm telling. And so viewers are moved by narrative, and facial expressions and body language humanize the artwork. And this is one of the things that occurred to me very, very early on, as I listened to people respond to my work and say different things. What I understood was that my artworks have a soul and people can tell. And so I use montages and symbols and text, and this all creates visual intrigue. It gives you a reason to look at the artwork and to begin to wonder about what this story is about. And as I said, you know, my subjects have souls and they have a way of speaking to the viewer. And I know this based on the kinds of things that people say back to me. One of the other things that's important to me is that I've discovered that monuments can create intimacy with the viewer. There are lots of ways to engage people visually, to make them look, to hold their eye. And in this process, they learn things very quickly that they might not have had an opportunity to learn before. So I find public art really accessible. I mean, you can walk into a public place at any time and walk out knowing a whole lot that you didn't know beforehand. So in this particular instance, I am telling the story of enslaved Africans in Yonkers, which is very interesting because the Phillips family who created the slave trade here, these were the people who were furnishing slaves, enslaved Africans for the better part of the county. They owned the county, 54,000 acres of land. And so it's a very interesting story. And again, it gave me a lot of room for showing the story visually. And again, the idea is to have the artwork be engaging. It's not enough just to create something pretty. You want to create something that's functional, that you know, people will engage, want to take pictures, want to look at, want to understand, why is this here? How did this get to be here? What is this about? What does it mean to me? And so with that comes what I call civic engagement. So, you know, over the years, and particularly the last dozen years or so, while I'm creating public art, I invite local college students, high school students, elementary schools to come into the studio to talk about the subject, but also to have an opportunity to see public art in progress. Most people don't know sculptors and most people don't get to see quote unquote statues being made. So for many, it's a really intriguing process. And again, you know, I often have parties, I call them previews, you know, in my house where I'll have, you know, easily 100 people passing through just to have an opportunity to see the artwork before it's cast, you know, to get an idea of what it looks like and to tell me how it makes them feel. And all this helps me to be centered, you know, when I'm coming up with concepts for art for public places, because public art is not curatorial art. Public art is about expressing the voice of the community, trying to tell stories about the community. It's for me, it's site specific because usually I'm dealing with history, which is usually grounded in matters of fact. The challenge with African-American history is that oftentimes it's distorted, it's incorrect, or it just hasn't been documented. So again, it gives me an opportunity to be able to tell untold stories in a very effective way. I also believe in destination learning, an opportunity to teach children stories about history, as well as when you're talking about slavery, you want to talk about civility. I lived in Columbia, Maryland, where civility actually is part of the curriculum. And I wish everybody would incorporate that into their curriculums, because this is how you breed healthy communities, teaching the young people what it means to be a good community member and how communities should work together and things like that. I think a lot of what we saw, as you say, with the election has to do with a lack of education. And so public art is a really cool way to do it quickly and effectively. And so we also have social media. And, you know, I discovered really 10 years ago how powerful social media can be. You have access to people all over the world. What really kind of blew me is how people from other countries that don't speak English want to talk about the work, that as human beings, they get the crux of the story. Doesn't matter to them that they don't speak the language, they can still feel the gravity of the story and where it's going. And also too, the other interesting thing about social media that I learned is that in other places, people don't look at this as Black art. They look at it as art about Black culture, which is a little different. And again, it gave me a great appreciation for the fact that art can transcend just about all of the boundaries, language boundaries, ethnicity, race, none of that seems to matter when you're dealing with art. And that makes it a really, really practical resource to use when you're trying to talk about history. And so, the goal is to create public art that's dramatic and exciting ways. This is the lighting for Victory. We wanted really, really amazing night lighting. So this is LED lights in the pavement, which I really hope we get to do. So goals are to design memorable places. If you're going to take the time to raise the money, or if you're going to take the time to spend the money after you've raised it, you want to create a memorable place, a place that is attractive, literally, where people want to come, where people want other people to come, where when you go home, you can't wait to tell somebody about something really amazing that you saw today because you want them to see it too. This is the goal for good public art. And again, it's a question of where inspiration and innovation converge, things that people haven't seen before. And, in this instance, I've really enjoyed working with architects, landscape architects, because again, they're like putting on reading glasses for me. They help me to see further, better. They magnify the story and make it intriguing. And so I'm looking forward. This is the original design for, again, the enslaved Africans rain garden. The design has evolved somewhat, but this is the general feel for it. I'm going backwards. Okay. The other thing is to balance a narrative about enslaved Africans. For Victory, it's about balancing the narrative about enslaved African women. For those of you that are not familiar, J. Marion Sims is considered the father of gynecology, and he got to be that way by experimenting on enslaved African women with no drugs, no painkillers. And then, of course, after he figured everything else, he went to Europe and did it on white women with, well, drugs and painkillers. And so the communities of Harlem and East Harlem spent 10 years getting that sculpture removed. And this is the sculpture that I intend to replace it with. We're hoping that the city of New York can recover enough in 2021 to lift the suspension, because at this point, all public art has been suspended in New York City due to COVID-19. But they were adamant that they were going to make the sculpture be a priority for 2021. So keep your fingers crossed on that. And so this particular sculpture is a reminder of the oath, first do no harm. Again, this is an oath that doctors take, and in the Hippocratic Oath, there actually is a clause that says you're not supposed to hurt women and children. And the fact that this doctor did, this is an opportunity to right a wrong. And so we're looking forward to getting that executed. In the final analysis, public art is a reflection of a community's values. And so, for instance, this is Sojourner Truth. She is installed up at the walkway over the Hudson on the Highland side. And what makes this sculpture important is not so much that it's Sojourner Truth, although that's really important, but the fact that, she was a native New Yorker at some point, that she lived here and that we can claim her as ours. She's part of our history. And so that makes the sculpture have even more gravity in terms of the meaning to the community where it's installed. And thank you. That's pretty much my presentation.
Thank you so much, Vinnie.
Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful to see that there are projects happening, and this is hopefully the beginning of that balance that you're talking about, to balance the narrative, to be more inclusive of African-American voices.
Yes.
So at this point, we would like to open this up to questions. And as I mentioned earlier, but in case you weren't here at the very, very beginning, we've asked people to put their questions into the Q&A, and feel free to do so with your name, or if you'd prefer to be anonymous, that's fine too. And if you have questions for anyone on the panel, feel free to ask them. I actually see that there is a question about Sarah Evans's paper that you mentioned, Carmen. Some beautiful graphics there that I have already learned a lot, and I just heard the tiny excerpt that you mentioned about her paper. And an anonymous person, an attendee here, would like to know if Sarah's paper has been published and if the original material for that can be accessed in some way. So I don't know if any of the panelists know that.
Katie would be the expert on that.
We do have, Cass has her paper, and Sarah drew from the Schomburg Center. She drew from the Adrian's Library here in the city of Poughkeepsie. We have it. We're also working on a Cass website, and once we have the website up, we'll be able to have that and many more things there.
And I know that Sarah is here, and actually she just chatted that it wasn't published, but she can figure out a way to send it out to people who are interested. Thank you so much, Sarah. So let's see if we have another question. It looks like we do have an anonymous attendee who has a question for you, Carmen, asking if you know the current family names of people who were slave owners in Poughkeepsie and the names of the enslaved as well that were residents of Poughkeepsie. And also, if you're aware of any burial sites of slaves
Okay.
In Poughkeepsie, and if yes, what is the city government's posture regarding those burial sites and what to do about those?
Okay. Well, at this particular point in time, we just started this organization in April of last year. So we're still in the research stage of determining who still lives in the community, who are descendants of the enslaved Africans who did the work and laid the foundation. So at this particular time, and we do have a list of all of the slaveholders, how many slaves they had. And Bill Jeffway is the person who has that information. And at this particular time, although I have the information, I do not have it with me. And but there were about 25 slaveholders who owned about 200 slaves cumulatively. During the whole period up until after 1827, when slavery was outlawed in New York State. And New York State had more slaves than any other state at the time except South Carolina.
Oh, that's a remarkable statistic. So I am seeing that there's another question, and this one is from one of our attendees whose name is Jolanda Jensen. And this is for you, Vinnie. She says, I love the Sojourner Truth statue. And whenever I go there, I hold her hand. So there's your civic engagement right there.
Right.
She wants to know though, does that wear the material of the statue, or is it okay to touch her as much as people are interested in doing?
Oh no, I want you to touch her. What's interesting, Ella Fitzgerald at the Yonkers Metro North Station has not been maintained. And if you ever see images of that, look close at the hands. Her hands are gold because people have touched her hands so much that they've pretty much rubbed off most of the patina. City of Yonkers is going to be restoring her this year. But whenever, and by the way, the sculpture's across the street from my house, I get to see it often if I want to. The point of public art is for it to be engaging. So the fact that you're compelled to touch it matters to me, because it suggests to me that you're compelled to do that you feel something about the artwork, and touching is often the way that people express their feelings about things. That's it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's working. So it doesn't bother me if you touch it. State of New York has a maintenance plan, so don't worry, they'll be on top of that, should it need some attention. But thank you for that. And somebody else asked me a question. I don't know, before that I was busy typing when it came through, but somebody asked me you know, if I could do a public artwork anywhere in New York, where would it be? I just want to do Victory for Fifth Avenue at 103. I mean, that, because the story itself is just so important, but also too, as a native New Yorker, to have a public artwork on Fifth Avenue is a big deal. And because the community fought so seriously for that artwork, I would really like to deliver it to them.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's an important location. And it does seem as though there is a large review happening in New York of all of the monuments and memorials that are there. So I think that the J. Marion Sims being, you know, the first that was taken down, I believe there will be others that are removed and replaced with hopefully things that are more appropriate and inclusive.
Yes.
So let's see, I think I have another question, and this one is from another professor at Vassar, Doyen Teriba. And he says, thank you to all the presenters, but his question is for Vinnie. And he says, Ms. Bagwell, if you've answered this question already, but I would love to hear some more about your commitment to realism in your sculptures. Indeed, you are a storyteller committed to present history through historical figures you sculpt. So when you create an Ella Fitzgerald, for instance, how do you picture her in your mind and the expressions of your heroines and heroes that you sculpt? Do you have a particular human expression in your mind before you begin sculpting a subject?
Yeah, I do. Okay, let's go back for a minute. In 2003, I was a finalist for the northwest corner of Central Park for Frederick Douglass Circle. And I made the most amazing sculpture. I mean, it's my favorite maquette of all time. It just has so much energy. And they picked someone else. The maquette that she made, well, let me say, it wasn't as realistic looking as mine, to be kind. And when I asked them about the critique, they said it was too real. I said, oh, I'm sorry. I thought you wanted Frederick Douglass. I mean, that's what I thought you wanted. You know, I gave you Frederick Douglass. It's Frederick Douglass. Realism is very important to me because when I went home, having lost, a man that I had met at a party, and I've only met this man one time, on the day that I got back, coincidentally, and I believe he's an angel, he brought me a book called Facing History. And on the back of the book, it said something to the effect of one of the ways that white people dehumanized enslaved Africans was to distort their imagery. So you had things like Step and Fetch It, you know, you had things like Aunt Jemima, you know, you have all these different distortions of Black people. And one of the things that Henry Louis Gates said in this quote on the back of this book is that when a Black artist does an artwork about a Black person, because we are Black, we take all of the love and the care and the beauty that we understand about being Black and we put it into the artwork. And I found that to be one of the truest things I had ever heard from somebody I didn't know. And it encouraged me to keep going, so to speak. Like, don't worry about that. You know, that evidently it wasn't for you. Just keep going. And I think that one of the reasons why realism is so important to me is because it humanizes the subject. You know, people often say, oh my God, they look like they're about to speak. And I'm like, that for me is a high compliment because it means that I'm close to where I want to be. You know, I want people to understand that Black people are people too, that skin color has nothing to do with anything. It's like you're talking about a God that makes 27 different shades of bananas, flowers, all kinds of things. Why not people? And that colorism, racism is really a socioeconomic virus, if you will. And it's something that really needs to be addressed. And I'm so happy for this time because it elevates the power of art in public places. And people seem to have a greater understanding of the importance of having a public artwork that represents the community. And so this is why it's important for the artworks to have a certain kind of beauty. You know, I found that you can say just about anything if it's pretty, you know, and so it allows me to say and tell difficult stories in beautiful ways that anybody can grasp and appreciate because of the beauty, because these people have been humanized in the artwork. So I think that that's all tied together.
Beautiful.
Thank you. So let's see, I will take a question now from Tanisha Means, an attendee who asks, how is the city and the county responding to the work of C.A.S.? Have they resisted at all or supported the initiative? And how do you think the local governments are reckoning with this history? And anyone can answer that.
Well, the political piece of our organization has not been fully realized. They are aware that we exist, but there has really been no interaction between the politics and the development of the organization. There are a couple of people who are part of our organization who are politicians, but since we are still in our infancy, we have not taken the full project to the political entities yet. We are waiting until we get more concrete information about location, about a building, about monument and or a memorial, about where our ancestral gardens will be placed. Of course, and all of these things, we have to ask permission for use of these lands, and some of them are public, some of them belong to the city, some belong to the county. So those are things that we still have, that ideas that we have that are still in the planning stages. So we have not gone with a plan yet because the plans have not been, they're not crystallized. They haven't, the clarity is not there yet for us to be able to present an effective presentation to the political entities.
Hi, I would just like to add, in addition to what Carmen just said, is that although we're still developing, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, the artistic side of our plan, we have been civically engaged. Several people, Katie, Carmen, myself, others have spoken at meetings of the Common Council, largely about the issue of police reform and other things that are boots on the ground issues for people here in the city. So as we had said, it's the convergence of art and activism, so that the artistic side is still under development, but we're out in the community, we're doing things, we're speaking, on topics that are relevant to the community. And we're also trying to support aspects of our community where there's a need, with food pantry donations and support of the Riverhaven Teen Center and other things, because life goes on every day and people are struggling every day. So we're involved on many levels, doing many things. And that's why it's so wonderful that so many people work on celebrating the African spirit, because, there's just a lot of things to do and we need many hands and minds and hearts to do it.
Thanks, Kalimah.
Yeah, thank you. And because there was a follow-up question about whether or not this is just a matter of sort of financial, raising the money, getting the permits, but I think it sounds like it's all of the above. And there's
it is. And since our 501c3 is pending, and that is usually required when you go looking for funds, that's the first thing that any organization or entity asks, is whether or not you have the 501c3. So that is still pending. It's been going. We did this at the beginning of the pandemic, and we're still waiting for that to come to fruition, because I'm quite sure that most of the people on the state level are having difficulty and delays thanks to COVID-19 also. So we're patiently waiting for the approval of our 501c3.
You can also, I mean, I did this for the first 5 years. I developed the Enslaved Africans Rain Garden Project. And for the first 5 years, I married the Arts Council, and Arts Westchester was my fiscal administrator. On other occasions, the city of Yonkers became my fiscal administrator. And so, you know, while you're waiting, if you have another organization that you feel has a similar mission who already has it, you know, you can always make arrangements to have them be the fiscal administrator and your partner. There's lots of ways to eat that elephant.
Thank you very much
Yeah,
for that little tidbit. That's great.
You just need somebody. Again, the idea is that it's a good fit. Like, for instance, the Arts Council, we had the same mission. And, you know, in one instance, it did become a conflict because we were going for the same money, so we couldn't do it that way. But you can also sometimes, like, for instance, for the National Endowment for the Arts example, you can use your city as the fiscal administrator. And so by the time you actually win and it gets executed, you probably will have your 501c3. That's how I got my National Endowment grant. Same thing with New York State for that matter. You know, it was a conflict for Arts Westchester. So I asked the city if they would apply for me. And I said, by the time we win, I will have my 501c3. And they're like, okay. And lo and behold, it worked out that way. So, you know, it depends on who you're asking for money, you know, because there are different ways that you can get around not having a 501c3.
Yes,
have your experience.
we do have a fiscal sponsor that would be behind us for large endeavors, and that's the community funds of the Hudson Valley.
Excellent.
Which currently, I believe, is chaired by Sally Cross.
Okay.
And I don't know if Sally's here tonight. We had, you know, invited her to listen in, so that if there's anyone out there with a bundle of money, we have a fiscal sponsor that can receive it.
There it is.
So I want to switch gears just a little bit because there's a question from an anonymous attendee that is very excited about focusing on these contributions of African Americans, and that C.A.S. is using language that refers to the goals of creating memorials. And I guess maybe this question is for you, Katie. How does that reflect some of the distinctions that you make between memorials and monuments and markers? How are those all sort of divided up in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're working on different fronts right now. As Carmen and Kalimah presented, we have gotten the most research together and sort of mock-ups around historical markers, and have been careful. Sue McIntosh and Peter Bunton and Bill Jeffway have been very careful about how those markers are worded. And we've imagined them, one on Market Street, one by the Mansion Street Post Office, one down at the Upper Landing, and as Kalimah described too, the Frederick Douglass, where Frederick Douglass gave his speech. So those markers we've gotten the most research on. I tend to favor memorials over monuments myself. Just I think that they can be powerful in the way that they speak to struggle, loss, some victory. And again, the terms are often used interchangeably. I do also think monuments are important, and I really do think that Vinnie's public artwork of Sojourner Truth is a powerful monument. And it joins a smaller monument of Sojourner Truth up in Port Ewan of her as a girl, right, when she's 10 or 11, and that was where she was enslaved, was very close to there. But memorials are what I'm imagining, and we have a great project. We, as Kalimah said, you know, we have VRINDA SHARMA working with us from Mass Design. We have, a great complementary group of people. We have Bart Thurber, our dear Loeb director, and we're thinking about a fitting memorial, and hopefully the idea of College Hill or elsewhere where will work. And that recognizes a collective struggle, collective sacrifice, often at the hands of serious violence, and yet an educational space too, that we can imagine memorials that, as Vinnie put it beautifully, that open up people, that invite them, that they learn from. And so we're very excited about that.
Thank you, Katie. So this is an interesting question from an anonymous attendee that asks if the panelists could address the issue of removing monuments and statues and also taking the names off of buildings, streets, and cities of anyone who was a slaveholder. And that the person comments that there are so many, and that would leave quite a bit of room for monuments to other people. So if anyone wants to comment on that, on the removal of these monuments.
I'm happy to just start, but I want others to jump in. I'm from Texas, and as I said at the outset of this, I grew up with a lot of Confederate monuments around me. Didn't think about them that much, and I appreciated over the many years, many recent years, people have, what I call memorial activists, have been struggling to get them down. And there's a huge battle to protect them among southern states in 2014, 2015, 2017, introduced state legislation to protect these Confederate monuments as sacred monuments, right? So when we've seen activists knock them down, in large part, one can argue, and I would as a political scientist, that if you have closed down democratic channels for discussion by creating these laws that say it's prohibited from removing them, it's not a surprise we see these monuments coming down. I know many memorial groups around the country who say, no, we cannot have these memorials on our courthouse lawn. They are traumatic for us. They represent slavery, and yet they have worked through, the memorial activists, through institutional channels that get blocked all the time at the county level and at the state level. I've really come to believe that, yes, ideally every community would have a discussion, about what should go there. We have these incredible artists like Vinnie and others who are creative in the kinds of things that could be there. And but I've come strongly to believe that they should all go in public squares. They should go, those slave owner statues. Yeah.
I think I agree with you completely, Katie. And I think that the issue of the names of streets is also an important one. I myself happen to live near Livingston Street, one of the biggest slaveholders of the area. Just down the street from me, or a couple of blocks away, is Knoxon Street, another slave owner from the era. Bill Jeffways had compiled this information into a very brilliant short piece that is just so eye-opening. And when you look at some of the names on here, which I'm looking on my phone, so if you just excuse my looking away from you folks, but Livingston is on here, Knoxon is on here, Palmetier. There are shopping centers named after Palmetier and malls. It's just many names that wouldn't, we're going to have to at some point rename large portions of Dutchess County in order to have the correct perspective about who the people were, what they did, who farmed the farms, who built the buildings, who tilled the land, who brought who worked the docks, so that I would think that at some point there would have to be city and county, commissions or studies that deal with this, because Dutchess County is at the moment a memorial to slavery.
Indeed.
So this is a little bit of a follow-up question from Lee Hall, an attendee who's a religious professional, and she said she's aware of some racist depictions in stained glass windows that have been removed from churches and not destroyed, but somehow preserved in a nearby library. So in the spirit of learning about such depictions, they've been preserved in a library. So I guess that's the other part of the question is what to do once they're removed. Do they get destroyed, or is there some way that we can learn lessons from these depictions that are removed maybe from the public realm, but become more of a little piece of history?
Absolutely. They can put them in museums, and they can, in any places where they can be seen by those people who want to go there to have that experience. I think that's important. And it is important to know what they consider the truth of the past and how that has evolved to the truth of today. As M. Scott Peck said, it's all in The Road Less Traveled, it is very important to change your truth when you get more information. It's important to analyze and change your truth. And if you do not change your truth with the new information, that is leads to a whole pathological experience. So I think that once you learn the truth, then you have to address the truth and work on that. If that changes the premise, then so be it. But it is important that the truth prevails.
I like how they put John Jay in the cemetery where he is buried. Not John, excuse me, J. Marion Sims, excuse me. They when they removed his sculpture, they put it in the cemetery where he's buried, which I thought was appropriate. I actually got into an argument with somebody about that last week because this was a white person who felt that it was just not right to destroy monuments. And I said, who's destroying what, where? Well, nobody's destroying anything. They're removing it and putting them in more appropriate places like museums and things like that. I have not heard of one monument being destroyed that has been taken down. Let's just for the last 3 or 4 years. You repurpose them. They're still educational. There's still a lot that you can learn just by looking at the artwork, certainly, but you put it in a different context. In this instance, you do not put a doctor who brutalized women on Fifth Avenue in New York City. He had his time, and now we've changed our perspective on that. And so the artwork has to go. And we're flipping the narrative. Rather than talking about the man who exalted himself and his career on the backs of the Black women, let's talk about the Black women who made this possible. Now, mind you, what J. Marion Sims discovered was useful for all women ultimately, but still it was a sacrifice that was made in that process. And, the New York City communities decided that we want to celebrate the women who made it possible. Just flipping the narrative. It's the same story, just a different side of the coin. So, nobody's advocating for the destruction of public artwork. That's not what we mean when we say take them down. We just mean take them out of that context, put them in a different context where it's more about the truth. And again, a museum is a great opportunity to expound how the sculpture got to be made, where it was originally located, why it was removed, and why it's here. So I don't think you can ask for any more than that.
Yeah,
Beautifully
I think
said.
it's being very generous. Because there's a politics of putting something in a museum in terms of space and money, and I'm not sure all of them should go into.
No, I'm not saying everyone. Not that you are. I'm just saying that there are all kinds of places, public places, where you could put an artwork, but again, you're changing the context of the artwork. Rather than exalting someone for advocating for slavery. It's like, you can still talk about them being an advocate for slavery, just not going to put them on a pedestal in the middle of Central Park. You know, this is all I'm saying.
No, that's right. And I think, you know, there have been groups with the Confederate monuments that have said, well, what if we put a plaque next to this statue that's the Confederate, you know, monument to the soldiers and sailors of the Confederacy? And the thing is, so what goes on that plaque? You know, it says, this is a monument that upheld slavery, white supremacy. You know, the state of Texas declared very, you know, baldly in its Declaration of Secession, it was about the preservation of slavery and the superiority of the white race. I mean, that is what is in the Texas Declaration. So you put a plaque there next to that, and then you're like, well, why should that still be there if that's what that's about, right?
This is the argument we had last week. The man said to me, so you're advocating for the removal of the Jefferson Memorial? I said, gee, you know, let me think about that. I really like the Jefferson Memorial. You know, you think that maybe if I put a sculpture of his slave concubine next to him, that makes it better? I mean, I said, that's not really a good example to ask me, because I like the Jefferson Memorial. I do. But it needs some attention. You just can't leave it the way it is. It needs something. And again, this is where creative people come in with their imaginations and right wrongs. This is what we do for a living. Again, you have to give it some real thought, though, because it's just like, gee, the Jefferson Memorial, drag. You know, I mean, there are a lot of monuments that are astoundingly marvelous, but they're wrong. They're not about the truth. They're advocating for some propaganda that dehumanizes a whole group of people. Flip that sometime, you know, let white people feel what Black people feel. I mean, recently with this election where people realized that maybe their votes weren't going to count, they're like, oh, welcome to the Black world. This is how we feel all the time, being disenfranchised and having things, you know, taken away from us and devalued and things like that. So, you know, this is a very interesting time, you know, and I think it's a great opportunity to open up new avenues for dialogue. Again, people have a lot to learn, a lot to learn. One of the interesting things I think about now is this whole concept of being unapologetically Black. You know, Black people for centuries have placated white people just so you could be comfortable with us, just so you don't feel threatened, just so we could be safe. And now we're just like, you know what, it's about time you all learned about reality, because there's a whole side of reality you know nothing about because we didn't let you know it. And now it's like, you know what, we feel that it's time to really honestly level the playing field. And that begins with information. You need to know, first of all, how we feel about this, what this means to us. And then the challenge from there is trying to navigate to some happy place where we can be satisfied that our voices are being not only heard, but respected.
Thank you, Vinnie. That's great to hear. And I want to make sure we have time for this question because we talked a little bit about fundraising for C.A.S, but Lisa Call, another Vassar colleague, would like to know how people can become involved with and contribute to C.A.S. And help move some of these amazing initiatives forward. And if it's okay with everyone, since it's a little after 7:30, this will be our last question for this evening.
Kalimah, would you answer that? Kalimah is our treasurer.
Yes. Okay. Hi. You can join C.A.S. Anyone, including students, is invited to join. Student memberships for those under 22 are only $5 a year, and other memberships are $25, $50, and $75 and $100. You can send a check to Celebrating the African Spirit, Post Office Box 1189, Poughkeepsie, New York 12602. We also invite you to attend our meetings, which right now are all being held via Zoom. If you follow us on our Facebook page and our Instagram page, you'll see when the next meeting is. And we invite everyone who is within the realm of Zoom is more than welcome. And we look forward to having you join us and work with us and attend our regular monthly meetings. Our next meeting is scheduled to be on Thursday, December 10th. And there'll be more information coming up soon on Facebook and Instagram about that meeting. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I think we're going to stop there. And I just want to reiterate my thanks to all of our panelists. Katie, it's been wonderful. You helped to organize this panel, and to have Carmen and Kalimah here representing the founding of this wonderful organization, celebrating the African spirit. And Vinnie, as our special guest, I wish you the best of luck with all of these wonderful statues that you're working on now. And it's so great to make this connection because you have really been a pioneer, and we're just getting started in our area. So we'll be following your lead. And I just want to remind everyone that the exhibition Monumental Misrememberings remains on view in the Focus Gallery at the Loeb until January 10th. You can check our website, which is fllac.vassar.edu for our hours and information about the exhibition, and also about further virtual programs. You can either check our website or sign up for our e-newsletter or look at our social media for future programs. And one more thank you to all of those who helped to organize and keep things moving very smoothly this evening, and to our participants. This is one of our biggest group of participants, so I hope everyone enjoyed the program.
Excellent, excellent.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
For joining us.
Thanks.